The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the sterile disciplinary chamber, casting harsh shadows across Lieutenant Sarah Chen's face as she stood at rigid attention. Her pristine naval uniform, adorned with ribbons that told the story of courage under fire, would soon be nothing more than a pile of fabric on the cold linoleum floor. What none of the officers present knew was that beneath that uniform lay a scar that would change everything. A thin, precise line on her left shoulder that held secrets capable of shaking the very foundation of naval command. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The charges against Lieutenant Chen were serious: insubordination, failure to follow direct orders, and conduct unbecoming of an officer. But as Commander Harrison read the accusations aloud, his voice echoing in the small chamber, Sarah's mind drifted to that fateful night 3 years ago, when she'd earned both her greatest honor and her deepest secret. The scar on her shoulder began to throb, a phantom pain that always returned when she was under extreme stress. "Lieutenant Chen," Commander Harrison's voice cut through her memories like a blade. "You are hereby ordered to surrender your uniform, insignia, and all military identification. You will be processed for immediate discharge under less than honorable conditions." Sarah's jaw tightened, but she maintained her composure. She had endured worse than this, much worse. Her fingers moved to the first button of her dress blues, and she began the humiliating process of stripping away everything she had worked for over the past 8 years of her naval career. Each button felt like another nail in the coffin of her dreams, another step away from the life she had built serving her country. The other officers in the room, Lieutenant Colonel Martinez, Captain Brooks, and Chief Petty Officer Williams, watched in uncomfortable silence. Some avoided eye contact, clearly struggling with what they were witnessing. Others maintained the cold, professional demeanor expected of military personnel carrying out an unpleasant but necessary duty. None of them knew the real Sarah Chen, the woman who had risked everything for a mission so classified that even her own service record had been scrubbed clean. As Sarah came off her jacket, she carefully folded it, her movements precise and deliberate despite the trembling in her hands. The ribbons on her chest caught the light one final time: the Navy Cross, the Silver Star, the Purple Heart. Each one represented a moment of sacrifice, a decision to put others before herself, a willingness to face death for the greater good. But the most important recognition she had ever received wasn't pinned to her chest, it was carved into her flesh, invisible to those who lacked the knowledge to understand its significance. Commander Harrison's expression remained stern as he watched the proceedings. He had been the one to bring the charges against Chen, convinced that her recent behavior warranted such drastic action. She had questioned orders that came directly from naval intelligence, had requested access to classified files that were far above her clearance level, and had been caught attempting to contact personnel in other branches of the military without proper authorization. In his mind, Lieutenant Chen had become a security risk that needed to be eliminated. What the commander didn't know was that Sarah's seemingly insubordinate behavior was actually the result of her growing awareness that something was terribly wrong within their own ranks. The same instincts that had made her such an exceptional naval officer were now screaming that the very people she served alongside might be compromised. Her attempts to access classified information hadn't been driven by curiosity or ambition. They had been desperate attempts to uncover a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of command. As Sarah continued to undress, her mind wandered to the events that had brought her to this moment. It had started 3 months ago with small inconsistencies, mission briefings that didn't quite add up, personnel transfers that seemed to follow suspicious patterns, and communications that were routed through channels she didn't recognize. Most officers would have dismissed these observations as the natural complexity of military operations. But Sarah's background in intelligence analysis had taught her to see patterns where others saw chaos. The room felt colder as more of her uniform came away, but Sarah's resolve only strengthened. She had faced enemy fire in the mountains of Afghanistan, had survived a helicopter crash in the South China Sea, and had completed missions that would remain classified for decades to come.
A humiliating discharge ceremony was not going to break her spirit. If anything, it was simply another obstacle to overcome in her ongoing mission to protect her country, even if that country's own military leadership couldn't see the threat right in front of them. Chief Petty Officer Williams shifted uncomfortably as Sarah's shirt came off, revealing the standard-issue military undershirt beneath. Williams had served with Chen on 2 deployments and had seen her courage firsthand. The woman standing before them wasn't the type to betray her oath or compromise military security. Something about this entire situation felt wrong, but Williams knew better than to voice such concerns during an official proceeding. As Sarah folded her shirt with the same meticulous care she had shown her jacket, she caught sight of her reflection in the polished surface of a filing cabinet across the room. The woman staring back at her looked older than her 31 years, marked by the weight of secrets and the burden of knowledge that no one else seemed willing or able to accept. But in her eyes there was still the fire that had driven her to excel in every assignment, to volunteer for the most dangerous missions, and to never give up even when the odds seemed impossible. The scar on her shoulder gave another throb, as if responding to her thoughts. Soon it would be visible to everyone in the room, but they would see it as nothing more than an old injury, perhaps from combat, perhaps from an accident during training. None of them possessed the knowledge to recognize it for what it truly was, proof of a mission so secret that it existed in the shadows between official government agencies, a mission that had required her to sacrifice not just her safety, but her very identity.
The heavy door to the disciplinary chamber burst open with a force that made everyone in the room jump. The sound of polished dress shoes clicked against the linoleum floor in a rhythm that spoke of absolute authority and barely contained urgency. Admiral Rebecca Morrison strode into the room, her silver hair pulled back in a regulation bun, her uniform immaculate, and her expression thunderous. At 63, she commanded respect through more than just her rank. She had earned her position through decades of exceptional service and a reputation for never backing down from a fight. "What the hell is going on here?" Admiral Morrison's voice cut through the chamber like a whip crack, causing Commander Harrison to snap to attention so quickly that he nearly lost his balance. The other officers followed suit, their previous confidence evaporating in the face of the Admiral's unexpected arrival and obvious displeasure. Commander Harrison's face went pale as he struggled to find his voice. "Admiral Morrison, ma'am, we are conducting a disciplinary hearing for Lieutenant Chen. She has been found guilty of—" "I didn't ask for a recitation of charges, Commander," Admiral Morrison interrupted, her steel-gray eyes scanning the room before settling on Sarah, who had frozen in the process of removing her undershirt. The Admiral's expression shifted almost imperceptibly as she took in the scene. A young officer being stripped of her dignity along with her uniform, surrounded by men who clearly had no understanding of what they were dealing with. "What the hell is going on here?" the Admiral continued, her voice dropping to a dangerously quiet tone that was somehow more intimidating than her earlier outburst. "Because from where I stand, it looks like you're conducting a kangaroo court against one of the finest officers in this entire command." Sarah's heart began to race, but she maintained her military bearing despite being caught in such a vulnerable position. She had heard of Admiral Morrison, of course. Every officer in the Navy knew the stories of the woman who had broken through barriers that had stood for generations, who had commanded vessels in combat zones when such opportunities were rarely given to women, and who had built a reputation for protecting her people no matter what political pressures came from above. But Admiral Morrison was looking at her with an intensity that went beyond professional interest. The Admiral's eyes seemed to be searching for something specific, some sign or confirmation that would explain her dramatic entrance into what should have been a routine disciplinary matter. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than a coincidence, that somehow Admiral Morrison knew exactly who she was and why she was really here. Commander Harrison cleared his throat nervously. "Admiral Morrison, with all due respect, Lieutenant Chen has violated several articles of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. She has repeatedly disobeyed direct orders, attempted to access classified information without proper authorization, and has shown a pattern of behavior that suggests she may be a security risk to this command."
Admiral Morrison's expression didn't change, but something dangerous flickered in her eyes. "Is that so, Commander? And tell me, exactly which direct orders did Lieutenant Chen disobey? I want specifics, not generalizations." The commander's confidence began to waver as he realized he was being put on the spot by a superior officer who clearly wasn't buying his justifications. "Well, Admiral, she refused to accept reassignment to a desk job in Norfolk. She insisted on investigating communications protocols that were clearly outside her area of responsibility, and she made unauthorized contact with personnel from other branches of the military." "Unauthorized contact," Admiral Morrison repeated slowly, as if tasting the words. "And did it occur to you, Commander, that Lieutenant Chen might have had very good reasons for her actions? Did you bother to investigate why an officer with her exemplary record would suddenly start behaving in ways that seemed contrary to her nature?" Sarah watched the exchange with growing hope and confusion. How could Admiral Morrison know enough about her record to defend her so passionately? Her official service jacket showed a competent but unremarkable career. The truly significant portions of her military service had been classified so deeply that they existed only in files that required clearance levels far above Commander Harrison's access. Lieutenant Colonel Martinez stepped forward, perhaps sensing that his fellow officer needed support. "Admiral Morrison, Lieutenant Chen's behavior over the past 3 months has been increasingly erratic. She's been asking questions about operations that are classified above her level, and she's shown a concerning interest in personnel movements that have nothing to do with her assigned duties." Admiral Morrison turned her attention to Martinez, and the man immediately regretted drawing her focus. "Erratic, Colonel? Or vigilant? Because in my experience, when a good officer starts asking uncomfortable questions, it's usually because they've noticed something that everyone else has missed." The Admiral took a step closer to Sarah, and for the first time since entering the room, her expression softened slightly. "Lieutenant Chen, I understand you've been subjected to what can only be described as a gross miscarriage of military justice. I want you to know that I am personally reviewing your case, and I have serious concerns about the charges that have been brought against you." Sarah's mind raced as she tried to process what was happening. Why would an admiral personally intervene in what appeared to be a routine disciplinary matter? How did she even know about the hearing? And why did she seem to know more about Sarah's true value as an officer than her own immediate superiors? The answer began to crystallize as Admiral Morrison's eyes dropped briefly to Sarah's left shoulder, where the scar was now partially visible above the neckline of her undershirt. The Admiral's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a flash of recognition followed quickly by what might have been respect or even reverence. "Commander Harrison," Admiral Morrison said without taking her eyes off Sarah, "I am ordering you to suspend this proceeding immediately. Lieutenant Chen is to be released from all charges pending a full review of her case by naval intelligence." "But Admiral," Commander Harrison protested, "the evidence clearly shows." "The evidence," Admiral Morrison cut him off with deadly precision, "shows that you and your fellow officers have made a serious mistake. One that could have catastrophic consequences, not just for Lieutenant Chen, but for national security." The room fell into stunned silence as the implications of the Admiral's words sank in. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. Somehow, Admiral Morrison knew about the scar, knew what it meant, and understood exactly who Sarah really was beneath the carefully constructed facade of an ordinary naval office.
Admiral Morrison's eyes remained fixed on the thin line of scar tissue that was now clearly visible on Sarah's left shoulder. To the other officers in the room, it appeared to be nothing more than an old injury, perhaps from combat, maybe from a training accident. But Admiral Morrison knew better. She recognized the precise placement, the surgical cleanness of the cut, and most importantly, the small symbol that had been carefully carved into the flesh alongside the main incision. "Gentlemen," Admiral Morrison announced without breaking eye contact with Sarah,
I need all of you to leave this room immediately. What I'm about to discuss with Lieutenant Chen is classified at levels that exceed all of your security clearances. Commander Harrison's face flushed with indignation. Admiral, with all due respect, this is highly irregular. We are in the middle of a disciplinary hearing, and I am the commanding officer responsible for... Commander, Admiral Morrison's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. You have exactly 30 seconds to vacate this room along with your colleagues, or I will have you arrested for interfering with a matter of national security. Your choice. The threat was delivered so calmly, so matter-of-factly, that there was no doubt in anyone's mind that the Admiral meant every word. Commander Harrison looked around the room, searching for support from his fellow officers, but found only uncomfortable silence and averted gazes. Whatever was happening here was clearly beyond their understanding or authority. "This isn't over, Admiral," Commander Harrison muttered as he gathered his papers and headed for the door. "There will be an investigation into this irregular proceeding." Admiral Morrison smiled, and the expression was anything but reassuring. "Commander, when this is all over, the only investigation you need to worry about is the one that will examine how you came so close to compromising an operation that has been in development for 3 years. As the last of the officers filed out of the room, Admiral Morrison moved to the door and engaged the electronic lock, ensuring their conversation would remain private. She then activated a small device from her pocket, a signal jammer that would prevent any electronic surveillance of their discussion. Sarah remained at attention, still partially undressed, her mind racing with questions and possibilities. The presence of the signal jammer confirmed her suspicions that this meeting was about much more than a routine disciplinary matter. Admiral Morrison clearly knew about her real identity, her true mission, and the significance of the scar that marked her as something far more dangerous than an ordinary naval officer. "You can put your shirt back on, Lieutenant. Or should I say, Agent Chen." Sarah's blood ran cold at the use of her operational title. Only a handful of people in the entire government knew that designation, and most of them were supposed to believe she was dead. She slowly reached for her shirt, her movements careful and controlled despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "How do you know that name?" Sarah asked quietly, her training taking over as she assessed the situation. Admiral Morrison could be an ally, but she could just as easily be the enemy that Sarah had been hunting for the past 3 months. Admiral Morrison walked to the far side of the room and took a seat behind the disciplinary committee's table. "I know that name because I'm the one who recommended you for the program 3 years ago. I'm also the one who has been monitoring your progress and trying to keep you alive while you've been digging into areas that certain people would prefer remained buried." Sarah finished buttoning her shirt and studied the Admiral's face, looking for any signs of deception. What she found instead was exhaustion, the deep, bone-weary tiredness of someone who had been carrying a tremendous burden for far too long. "The Shadow Protocol," Sarah said, naming the operation that had officially never existed. Admiral Morrison nodded slowly. "The Shadow Protocol, the most classified anti-terrorism initiative in American history, designed to identify and eliminate threats that traditional military and intelligence services couldn't touch. You were one of 12 operatives selected for the program, and after the mission in Syria, you were the only one left alive." Sarah's hand unconsciously moved to her shoulder, where the scar tissue served as both a badge of honor and a permanent reminder of what she had lost. The surgical procedure that had implanted the micro-tracking device and identification beacon had been performed in a bunker somewhere in the Syrian desert, with enemy forces closing in and the rest of her team already dead. The device had saved her life, but it had also marked her for a life of shadows and secrets. "So you know about the compromised intelligence network?" Sarah said. It wasn't a question. Admiral Morrison's expression grew grim. "I know that someone within our own command structure has been feeding information to hostile foreign agents. I know that the attacks on Shadow Protocol operatives weren't random terrorist actions, but targeted assassinations based on leaked intelligence. And I know that you've been getting close to identifying the source of the leaks." Sarah felt a mix of relief and apprehension wash over her. After months of working in isolation, convinced that she was alone in her suspicions, it was both validating and terrifying to learn that someone else not only knew the truth but was actively working to expose it. "Commander Harrison," Sarah said, the pieces of the puzzle beginning to fall into place. Admiral Morrison shook her head. "Commander Harrison is incompetent, not treasonous. He's been manipulated by people much smarter and more dangerous than he is. The real threat is someone with access to the highest levels of naval intelligence, someone who has been systematically eliminating anyone who might expose their operation." "Then why reveal yourself now?" Sarah asked. "If you've been monitoring me, you must know that I was close to identifying the source of the leaks." Admiral Morrison stood up and moved to the window, looking out at the naval base that stretched beyond the building. "Because 30 minutes ago, I received intelligence that there's going to be another attempt on your life. The disciplinary hearing wasn't just about discrediting you, but about isolating you, making you vulnerable, and ensuring that your death could be written off as the suicide of a disgraced officer." Sarah felt the familiar chill of mortal danger, the same sensation that had kept her alive through countless missions in hostile territory. Who ordered the hit? Admiral Morrison turned back to face her, and Sarah could see the weight of betrayal in the older woman's eyes. "Someone I trusted. Someone I worked with for over 15 years. Someone who has been using their position to sell American military secrets to the highest bidder while hiding behind a facade of patriotism and honor." The Admiral paused, and Sarah could see her gathering the strength to speak a name that would change everything. "Vice Admiral Thomas Bradley, my former mentor, my trusted colleague, and the man who has been systematically destroying the Shadow Protocol from the inside."
Preparing and narrating the story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The name hit Sarah like a physical blow. Vice Admiral Thomas Bradley, a man whose face appeared on recruitment posters, whose speeches about duty and honor were legendary throughout the naval community, whose service record read like a textbook example of military excellence. If Admiral Morrison was correct, then everything Sarah had believed about the integrity of naval command was built on a foundation of lies and betrayal. "Bradley," Sarah repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "But he's the one who authorized the Shadow Protocol in the first place. He's the one who personally selected each operative, who oversaw our training, who sent us into Syria with assurances that we had the full support of naval intelligence." Admiral Morrison's expression was grim as she returned to her seat. That's exactly what makes him so dangerous. He didn't just have access to Shadow Protocol operations, he had complete control over them. Every mission briefing, every target assignment, every extraction plan passed through his office. He knew exactly where each operative would be and when they would be most vulnerable. Sarah's mind raced as she processed the implications. The mission in Syria had been compromised from the beginning. The intelligence that led them into that ambush hadn't been faulty, it had been deliberately falsified. The 12 operatives of Shadow Protocol hadn't died because of bad luck or enemy preparation. They had been sacrificed by the very man who was supposed to protect them. "The tracking device in my shoulder," Sarah said, her hand moving unconsciously to the scar. "He knows I'm still alive." "He's known for 3 years," Admiral Morrison confirmed. "But he's been waiting, watching, letting you gather intelligence while he prepared his final move. Every piece of evidence you've uncovered about the compromised network, every connection you've made between seemingly unrelated security breaches, he's been aware of all of it." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "Then why am I still alive? If he's had the ability to eliminate me for 3 years, why wait until now?" Admiral Morrison leaned forward, her expression intense. "Because you weren't just gathering evidence against random naval personnel. You were building a case against him specifically, even if you didn't realize it. Every suspicious communication you've traced, every personnel transfer you've questioned, every security breach you've investigated, they all lead back to Bradley's office. He couldn't kill you without risking exposure, but he couldn't let you continue either." The Admiral pulled out a classified folder and placed it on the table between them. 3 months ago, you submitted a request to review communications logs from the Cerium operation. That request triggered automated alerts in Bradley's monitoring system. He knew you were getting close to the truth about what really happened to your team. Sarah's anger began to build, a cold fury that she recognized from her darkest moments in combat. So the disciplinary charges were his way of neutralizing me without having to order another assassination? Exactly. A disgraced officer who commits suicide after being stripped of rank and facing court-martial, it's a tragic but believable story. No one would question it, and more importantly, no one would investigate it. Your death would be written off as the unfortunate end of a promising career gone wrong. Admiral Morrison opened the classified folder, revealing surveillance photos, communication intercepts, and financial records that painted a picture of betrayal spanning several years. Bradley has been selling intelligence assets to foreign agents since before Shadow Protocol even existed. The program wasn't created to fight terrorism. It was created to provide him with valuable assets he could sacrifice to his buyers while maintaining plausible deniability. Sarah studied the documents, her training in intelligence analysis allowing her to quickly identify patterns and connections. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank transfers that corresponded to major intelligence leaks, communication logs showing contact with known foreign agents, and, most damning of all, detailed records of Shadow Protocol operations that had been transmitted to enemy networks days before each mission. "How long have you known?" Sarah asked. Admiral Morrison's expression grew haunted. "I began to suspect something was wrong 6 months after the Syrian operation. Too many of our intelligence assets were being compromised. Too many operations were failing in ways that suggested inside knowledge. But I couldn't prove anything, and Bradley's reputation made him untouchable." The Admiral pulled out a classified photograph showing Bradley meeting with a man Sarah recognized as a known arms dealer with connections to several terrorist organizations. "This picture was taken 4 months ago. That's when I knew for certain that my suspicions were correct. Bradley wasn't just passively allowing intelligence leaks, he was actively orchestrating them." Sarah felt the weight of betrayal settle over her like a heavy blanket. Every mission she had completed, every risk she had taken, every sacrifice she had made, all of it had been in service of a man who had been working against her from the very beginning. The teammates who had died in Syria hadn't just been casualties of war, they had been murdered by someone they trusted implicitly. "What's his endgame?" Sarah asked. "He can't keep this up indefinitely. Eventually, someone else would have noticed the patterns." Admiral Morrison's expression grew darker further. "He doesn't need to keep it up indefinitely. Bradley is scheduled to retire in 6 months with full honors and a position on the board of directors for 3 major defense contractors. But before he leaves, he plans to sell the most valuable intelligence asset he's ever had access to." Sarah's blood ran cold as the implications hit her. The complete Shadow Protocol database? Every operative, every mission, every safe house, every contact, everything. He's planning to auction it off to the highest bidder, which will not only compromise ongoing operations, but will also provide enemy agents with the identities and locations of every American intelligence asset connected to the program. Admiral Morrison leaned back in her chair, and Sarah could see the exhaustion of someone who had been carrying this burden alone for too long. "We have 72 hours to stop him." Sarah's training kicked in as she began to process the tactical situation. "So, we have 3 days to stop him. What resources do we have?" Admiral Morrison smiled for the first time since entering the room, and Sarah caught a glimpse of the legendary officer who had earned her reputation through decades of decisive action under pressure. "We have you, Agent Chen. We have the element of surprise, since Bradley believes you'll be dead within hours, and we have something he doesn't know about, a backup protocol that was built into Shadow Protocol from the beginning, designed to be activated only in case of catastrophic compromise." The Admiral stood up and moved to a secure safe built into the wall, using both a keycard and a biometric scanner to access its contents, the Phoenix Protocol. It was designed to resurrect Shadow Protocol operatives who had been presumed dead and give them the resources necessary to eliminate threats that conventional military and intelligence services couldn't touch. Sarah watched the Admiral remove a small device that looked like an ordinary smartphone, but was clearly much more sophisticated. This contains everything you need: new identity documents, access codes for classified databases, contact information for assets who can provide support, and, most importantly, the location of Bradley's planned meeting with his buyers. As Admiral Morrison handed her the device, Sarah felt the familiar weight of responsibility that came with every dangerous mission. But this time, it was different. This time, she wasn't just fighting for her country. She was fighting for the memory of her fallen teammates and the safety of countless other operatives who were counting on her success. "There's one more thing," Admiral Morrison said, her voice taking on a tone of deadly seriousness. "Bradley isn't working alone. He has a network of compromised officers throughout Naval Command, and some of them are in positions high enough to know about this conversation. From the moment you leave this room, you'll be operating in hostile territory, surrounded by people who want you dead."
Sarah pocketed the Phoenix Protocol device and felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with the beginning of a high-stakes operation. The small device represented more than just intelligence and resources. It was her lifeline back into a world she thought she had lost forever, a chance to finally strike back at the people who had destroyed her team and corrupted everything she had sworn to protect. "What about you?" Sarah asked Admiral Morrison. "If Bradley has compromised officers throughout the command structure, your involvement in this meeting will be discovered eventually." Admiral Morrison's smile was cold and determined. "Let me worry about my own security, Agent Chen. I've been playing this game longer than Bradley has, and I have resources he doesn't know about. Your job is to focus on stopping that intelligence sale and eliminating the threat to American assets worldwide." Sarah nodded, her mind already shifting into operational mode. 3 days to identify Bradley's network, locate the meeting site, and prevent the sale of intelligence that would compromise countless lives. It was the kind of impossible timeline that Shadow Protocol had been designed to handle, but she would be operating alone, without the support team that had made such missions feasible. "I'll need to disappear from here without raising suspicions," Sarah said, analyzing the tactical situation. "If Bradley has compromised officers throughout the command structure, your involvement in this meeting will be discovered eventually." Admiral Morrison's smile was cold and determined. "Let me worry about my own security, Agent Chen. I've been playing this game longer than Bradley has, and I have resources he doesn't know about. Your job is to focus on stopping that intelligence sale and eliminating the threat to American assets worldwide." Sarah nodded, her mind already shifting into operational mode. 3 days to identify Bradley's network, locate the meeting site, and prevent the sale of intelligence that would compromise countless lives. It was the kind of impossible timeline that Shadow Protocol had been designed to handle, but she would be operating alone, without the support team that had made such missions feasible. "I'll need to disappear from here without raising suspicions," Sarah said, analyzing the tactical situation. "If Bradley has compromised officers throughout the command structure, your involvement in this meeting will be discovered eventually." Admiral Morrison's smile was cold and determined. "Let me worry about my own security, Agent Chen. I've been playing this game longer than Bradley has, and I have resources he doesn't know about. Your job is to focus on stopping that intelligence sale and eliminating the threat to American assets worldwide." Sarah nodded, her mind already shifting into operational mode. 3 days to identify Bradley's network, locate the meeting site, and prevent the sale of intelligence that would compromise countless lives. It was the kind of impossible timeline that Shadow Protocol had been designed to handle, but she would be operating alone, without the support team that had made such missions feasible. "I'll need to disappear from here without raising suspicions," Sarah said, analyzing the tactical situation. "If Bradley has compromised officers throughout the command structure, your involvement in this meeting will be discovered eventually." Admiral Morrison moved to the door and deactivated the signal jammer. "That's already been arranged. In 5 minutes, base security will respond to a fire alarm in the communications building. During the confusion, you'll suffer a complete emotional breakdown over your disgrace and will be taken to the base medical facility for psychological evaluation." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Psychological evaluation?" Dr. Sarah Williams in the medical facility is one of the few people on this base I trust completely. She'll provide you with a medical discharge that will allow you to leave the base without triggering any security protocols. From there, you'll be on your own until you can establish contact with the assets identified in the Phoenix Protocol device. As if on cue, fire alarms began wailing throughout the building, and Sarah could hear the sound of personnel moving quickly through the corridors outside. Admiral Morrison moved to the door and placed her hand on the handle, ready to open it and begin the carefully choreographed deception that would allow Sarah to escape. "One last thing," Admiral Morrison said, her voice barely audible over the alarms. "Bradley's buyers aren't just foreign governments or terrorist organizations. According to our intelligence, at least 2 major defense contractors are involved in the bidding, along with several private military companies that have contracts with hostile nations. This isn't just about selling state secrets. It's about creating a shadow market for American intelligence that will operate independently of any government oversight." Sarah felt her anger deepen as the full scope of Bradley's betrayal became clear. He wasn't just compromising current operations, he was establishing a system that would allow the continuous exploitation of American military and intelligence assets for profit. Every future operation, every classified program, every life risked in service to the country would be potential merchandise in Bradley's twisted marketplace. "Understood," Sarah said simply. There was no need for lengthy promises or emotional declarations. Admiral Morrison could see in her eyes the same determination that had carried her through the mountains of Afghanistan and the deserts of Syria. Admiral Morrison opened the door, and immediately her voice changed to a concerned but authoritative tone of a superior officer dealing with a crisis. "Lieutenant Chen, I need you to come with me immediately. There's been an incident, and we need to evacuate the building." Sarah allowed her carefully maintained composure to crack, tears beginning to flow as she portrayed a young officer overwhelmed by the destruction of her career and the apparent betrayal by her superiors. It wasn't difficult to access the emotions. After 3 years of isolation and suspicion, the release was almost cathartic. As they moved through the corridors filled with personnel responding to the fire alarm, Sarah noticed several officers whose faces matched photographs she had seen in her investigation of the compromised intelligence network. They were watching her with more than casual interest, and she realized that her cover identity was already compromised among Bradley's network of corrupt officers. Dr. Williams was waiting for them at the medical facility, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and the efficient manner of someone who had spent years dealing with military personnel in crisis. She took one look at Sarah's apparent emotional state and immediately moved into action, gently guiding her to a private examination room while Dr. Williams explained the situation to the gathered medical staff. Dr. Chen has suffered a severe psychological break as a result of the disciplinary proceedings. Dr. Williams will conduct a full evaluation and provide recommendations for treatment. Once they were alone in the examination room, Dr. Williams' demeanor shifted subtly. "Agent Chen," she said quietly, "Dr. Morrison briefed me on your situation. I'm going to provide you with a medical discharge that will allow you to leave the base immediately, along with medications that will serve as props for your cover identity." Sarah nodded, impressed by the speed and efficiency with which Admiral Morrison had arranged her extraction. "How long do I have before Bradley's people realize what happened?" Dr. Williams checked her watch. "The discharge will be processed within an hour. After that, you'll have perhaps 6 hours before someone with sufficient clearance reviews the paperwork and realizes that it doesn't match your actual psychological profile. By then, you need to be far from here and operating under a new identity." The doctor handed Sarah a small medical bag containing prescription bottles and official medical documents. These medications are actually high-energy supplements and enhanced vitamins designed for extended operations. The psychiatric evaluation in your file will indicate severe depression and anxiety requiring immediate civilian treatment, which should discourage any attempts to track you through military medical channels. Sarah studied the documents, noting the careful attention to detail that would make her cover story believable to anyone without access to the highest levels of classification. "Thank you, Doctor. You're taking a significant risk by helping me." Dr. Williams' expression grew serious. "Agent Chen, I served as a field medic during the early days of the Shadow Protocol. I treated operatives who came back from missions that officially never happened, and I've seen the sacrifices that people like you make for this country. If Admiral Morrison says you're our best hope of stopping a threat to national security, then that's all I need to know. As Dr. Williams finished preparing Sarah's discharge paperwork, Sarah activated the Phoenix Protocol device for the first time. The screen came to life with a simple interface that provided access to intelligence databases, secure communication channels, and, most importantly, a map showing the locations of safe houses and support assets throughout the region. The first message waiting for her was from Admiral Morrison. "Phoenix is active. Assets have been notified. Your first contact is waiting at coordinates included in attachment. Trust no one except confirmed Phoenix assets. Bradley's network is larger than we initially suspected. Good luck."
Sarah left the naval base behind her as the sun set over the Chesapeake Bay, driving a nondescript sedan that Dr. Williams had arranged to be waiting in the civilian parking area. The medical discharge documents in her purse identified her as a former naval officer suffering from severe post-traumatic stress disorder, requiring immediate psychiatric treatment at a civilian facility. It was a cover story that would discourage casual investigation while providing a plausible explanation for her sudden departure from military service. The Phoenix Protocol device guided her through a series of evasive maneuvers designed to detect and lose any surveillance that might have been placed on her. She changed vehicles twice, used public transportation for several miles, and finally arrived at her destination after dark, a small apartment building in Alexandria that looked completely ordinary from the outside, but housed one of the most sophisticated intelligence safe houses on the East Coast. The contact waiting for her was Marcus Rodriguez, a former Navy SEAL who had transitioned into intelligence work after being wounded in Afghanistan. His official records showed him as a retired veteran receiving disability benefits, but the Phoenix Protocol database revealed his true identity as one of Admiral Morrison's most trusted assets. He was waiting in apartment 3B, which served as both a safe house and a communications center for operations that required complete separation from official military channels. "Agent Chen?" Marcus greeted her as she entered the apartment, his voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had survived countless dangerous situations. "Admiral Morrison briefed me on your situation. We don't have much time before Bradley's network realizes you've gone underground." The apartment appeared to be the modest home of a retired military man, complete with family photos and military memorabilia. But Sarah's trained eye noticed the subtle signs of its true purpose: reinforced walls, advanced communications equipment hidden behind false panels, and sight lines that allowed observation of all approaches to the building. Marcus activated a secure terminal that emerged from what had appeared to be an ordinary coffee table. "We've been monitoring Bradley's communications since Admiral Morrison confirmed his involvement in the intelligence leaks. In the past 6 hours, there's been a significant increase in encrypted traffic between his office and several international contacts." Sarah studied the communication patterns displayed on the screen, her analytical training allowing her to identify the telltale signs of operational coordination. "He's moving up the timeline. The intelligence sale isn't happening in 3 days. It's happening tomorrow night." Marcus nodded grimly. "That's our assessment as well. The fire alarm at the base and your subsequent disappearance has spooked him. He knows that someone is onto his operation, and he's trying to complete the sale before his network can be fully exposed." The urgency of the situation sent adrenaline coursing through Sarah's system. One day to identify the location of the sale, infiltrate what would certainly be a heavily secured meeting, and prevent the transfer of intelligence that would compromise the lives of dozens of American assets worldwide. It was the kind of mission that would normally require weeks of planning and a full operational team. "What assets do we have available?" Sarah asked, falling back on her training to assess the resources at her disposal. Marcus brought up a secure database showing Phoenix Protocol assets throughout the region. 3 former Shadow Protocol operatives who survived missions in other theaters, 2 intelligence analysts with access to classified databases, and a handful of support personnel who can provide technical assistance. Not exactly an army, but these are people who have experience with the kind of operation we're planning.
Sarah studied the profiles of the available operatives, noting their specialties and operational histories. Each one had a story similar to her own, officially dead or missing, actually operating in the shadows under the protection of Admiral Morris and his network. They were ghosts in the machine, invisible to official oversight, but capable of actions that conventional military forces couldn't undertake. There's something else, Marcus continued, his expression growing more serious. Our surveillance has identified at least 3 foreign intelligence services that are aware of the sale: the Russians, the Chinese, and what appears to be a Middle Eastern network with connections to several terrorist organizations. They're not just planning to bid on the intelligence, they're planning to eliminate the competition. Sarah felt the familiar chill of mortal danger that had kept her alive through countless missions. But it also reminded her of what she was fighting for: the memory of her fallen teammates, the safety of current operatives, and the integrity of the service she had sworn to protect. Tomorrow night at Pier 47, the hunt that had begun 3 years ago in the Syrian desert would finally come to an end.
The abandoned shipping facility at Pier 47 looked like a graveyard of American industrial might, its rusted cranes and empty warehouses standing as monuments to a time when Baltimore Harbor had been the gateway for goods flowing into the heart of the nation. Now, in the pre-dawn darkness of what would be the most crucial night of Sarah's life, those same structures provided the perfect cover for a transaction that would betray everything those earlier generations had built. Sarah lay prone on the roof of Warehouse C, her sniper rifle trained on the main facility where Bradley's intelligence sale was scheduled to take place in less than 2 hours. Through her night vision scope, she could see the careful preparations taking place below: security teams establishing perimeters, vehicles being positioned for quick escapes, and the subtle electronic warfare equipment that would prevent outside surveillance of the meeting. Marcus's voice crackled through her earpiece with the latest intelligence update. Phoenix 2 and 3 are in position on the south and east approaches. Foreign asset movement has increased significantly in the past hour. We're counting at least 25 hostiles, not including Bradley's security team. Sarah adjusted her position slightly, maintaining her sight lines while ensuring she remained invisible to the thermal imaging equipment that several of the foreign teams were using to scan the area. Copy that, Phoenix Base. Any word on the specific intelligence packages Bradley is planning to sell? Confirmed, came the response from Dr. Amanda Foster, the Phoenix Protocol intelligence analyst who was coordinating the operation from a mobile command center 3 miles away. Complete Shadow Protocol database, including operative identities, safe house locations, and contact information for over 200 foreign assets who have provided intelligence to American forces. Also confirmed, detailed specifications for 3 classified weapon systems currently under development. Sarah felt her jaw clench as the full scope of Bradley's betrayal became clear. He wasn't just selling operational intelligence. He was providing enemy forces with the blueprints for advanced American military technology, along with the identities of every person who had risked their lives to help American forces overseas. The sale wouldn't just compromise current operations. It would cripple American intelligence capabilities for years to come. Movement in the main facility caught her attention as a convoy of black SUVs approached the designated meeting area. Through her scope, she could see Vice Admiral Bradley emerging from the lead vehicle, dressed in civilian clothes, but still carrying himself with the bearing of a senior military officer. He was accompanied by 6 security personnel, all of whom appeared to be former military contractors with extensive combat experience. "Target acquired," Sarah reported. Bradley is on site with security detail, beginning final preparations for mission execution. But even as she spoke, Sarah's tactical awareness was screaming warnings about the complexity of the situation developing below. The foreign intelligence teams weren't just positioning themselves to participate in the auction. They were setting up overlapping fields of fire that would turn the entire facility into a killing zone. Someone down there was planning to eliminate all the other bidders once they had confirmed the authenticity of the intelligence being sold. "Phoenix Base, we have a problem. This isn't just an intelligence sale. Someone is planning a massacre. The positioning of the foreign team suggests they're preparing to eliminate all competition once the transaction is completed."
Marcus's voice came back immediately. Can you identify which team is planning the betrayal? Sarah swept her scope across the various foreign positions, noting the tactical preparations and equipment choices. Negative. Could be any of them or all of them. The Russians have heavy weapons concealed in their vehicles, the Chinese team has brought enough explosives to level the entire facility, and the Middle Eastern group has positioned snipers with overlapping coverage of all escape routes. Dr. Foster's voice cut through the tactical chatter with new intelligence. Phoenix 1, we're intercepting communications that suggest Bradley is aware of the foreign team's intentions. He's planning to transmit the intelligence data electronically during the meeting, then trigger some kind of distraction that will allow him to escape while the foreign teams eliminate each other. Sarah's mind raced as she processed the implications. Bradley wasn't just selling intelligence. He was orchestrating a situation that would eliminate multiple foreign intelligence networks while allowing him to disappear with the profits. It was a plan worthy of a master strategist, but it also represented the ultimate betrayal of everything the naval service was supposed to represent. New mission parameters, Sarah announced, her voice carrying the cold determination that her teammates had learned to recognize as a sign that she was about to do something extremely dangerous. We're not just stopping the intelligence sale. We're taking down Bradley's entire network and neutralizing the foreign threats simultaneously. Marcus's voice carried a note of concern. Phoenix 1, that's a significant escalation beyond our original mission parameters. Are you sure you can handle that level of complexity? Sarah's response was immediate and uncompromising. Marcus, 3 years ago, 12 good people died because Bradley sold them out for money. Tonight, we make sure he can never do that to anyone else again. I don't care how many foreign agents are down there, they picked the wrong night to come hunting in American waters. As if to emphasize her point, Sarah's scope picked up movement that made her blood run cold. A 13th figure had emerged from Bradley's convoy, a man whose face she recognized from her nightmares. The Syrian intelligence officer who had led the ambush that killed her team. Somehow, Bradley had arranged for the very people responsible for murdering Shadow Protocol operatives to participate in the sale of classified intelligence. The scar on her shoulder began to throb with phantom pain, but this time, instead of weakness, it filled her with an ice-cold fury that sharpened her focus to a razor's edge. Tonight, on the docks of Baltimore Harbor, the ghosts of Shadow Protocol would finally have their revenge.
The meeting began at exactly 2300 hours, with representatives from each foreign intelligence service approaching the central warehouse under the watchful eyes of multiple sniper teams. Sarah watched through her scope as Bradley positioned himself at the center of the gathering, a tablet computer in his hands containing the intelligence that would reshape the balance of power in the shadow wars fought between nations. The first to approach was Colonel Dmitry Volkov of Russian military intelligence, a man whose reputation for ruthlessness was matched only by his tactical brilliance. He moved with the confidence of someone who had spent decades operating in hostile territory, but Sarah could see the subtle signs of tension that indicated he was as aware as she was that this meeting was likely to end in violence. The Chinese representative was Dr. Li Wei, officially a cultural attaché, but actually one of Beijing's most effective intelligence operatives. She approached the gathering with a small briefcase that Sarah's briefing materials had identified as containing payment authorization for up to $50 million in untraceable cryptocurrency. But it was the arrival of Khalil Assad that sent adrenaline surging through Sarah's system. The Syrian operative looked exactly as she remembered him from that terrible night 3 years ago. Tall, lean, with the calculating eyes of a predator who had built his reputation on the deaths of American soldiers and intelligence operatives. Seeing him standing casually beside Bradley, as if they were old friends discussing a routine business transaction, filled Sarah with a rage that she struggled to keep under control. "Phoenix Base," she transmitted. "Assad's presence confirms that this sale has been planned for years. Bradley didn't just compromise Shadow Protocol. He actively collaborated with enemy forces to ensure our operatives would be killed." Marcus's voice came back tense with controlled anger. "Copy that, Phoenix 1. All units are authorized for immediate engagement upon your signal. Take them all down."
But Sarah was already moving, her sniper rifle secured across her back as she made her way down from the warehouse roof, using rappelling equipment that would allow her to reach ground level in less than 30 seconds. The foreign intelligence teams were so focused on watching each other that none of them noticed the shadow moving through the darkness above their heads. Bradley had begun his presentation, the tablet computer projecting classified documents onto a large screen that all the bidders could see. Sarah recognized some of the intelligence being displayed: operational plans she had helped develop, safe house locations where she had once hidden from enemy forces, and most painfully, detailed personnel files for Shadow Protocol operatives who had trusted their lives to the security of their command structure. "As you can see," Bradley was saying, his voice carrying easily across the open space, "this intelligence represents the complete operational framework for American covert operations in your respective regions. With this information, you will be able to identify and eliminate every American asset currently operating in hostile territory." Colonel Volkov stepped forward to examine the documents more closely. "This is impressive, Admiral Bradley, but how do we know this intelligence is current? Some of these operational plans appear to be several years old." Bradley smiled with the confidence of a man who held all the cards. "Because, Colonel, I have been continuously updating this database with current intelligence for the past 3 years. Every new operation, every new asset, every change in protocol. It's all been documented and included in the package you're purchasing." Sarah had reached ground level and was now moving through the shadows between shipping containers, using her knowledge of urban warfare to approach the meeting from an angle that none of the security teams were watching. She could hear every word of Bradley's presentation through the wireless microphone system he was using, and each revelation made her more determined to ensure that none of these people left the facility alive. Dr. Li Wei raised her briefcase. "The financial arrangements are acceptable to Beijing. However, we require verification that this intelligence is authentic before we complete the transaction." Bradley nodded, as if he had expected the request. "Of course. Mr. Assad, would you care to provide confirmation regarding the accuracy of the Shadow Protocol intelligence?" Khalil Assad stepped forward, and when he spoke, his voice carried the satisfaction of a man who had achieved a long-sought victory. "I can personally confirm the accuracy of this intelligence. 3 years ago, Admiral Bradley provided my organization with the operational details for a Shadow Protocol mission in Syria. Using that information, we were able to eliminate 11 American operatives and capture one alive for interrogation before she eventually escaped." Sarah's hand moved to the scar on her shoulder as Assad continued his testimony. "The intelligence provided by Admiral Bradley was so accurate that we knew not only the exact location where the American operatives would be, but also their individual specialties, their backup plans, and even their extraction procedures. It was like reading their minds." The casual way Assad described the murder of her teammates sent Sarah over the edge of controlled fury into something far more dangerous. She was no longer thinking like a professional intelligence operative following mission parameters. She was thinking like a predator who had finally cornered the prey that had been hunting her for 3 years. Bradley was reaching for a device that would electronically transfer the complete intelligence database to his buyers when Sarah stepped out of the shadows, her pistol drawn and trained on the center of his chest. "Hello, Admiral. I think we need to discuss the terms of your retirement." The reaction was immediate and violent. Security personnel reached for weapons, foreign operatives dove for cover behind vehicles and shipping containers, and Bradley's face went white as he realized that his carefully orchestrated plan was about to become a battlefield where only the most skilled and ruthless would survive. But Sarah was no longer the inexperienced operative who had barely escaped from Syria 3 years ago. She was a weapon forged in the fires of betrayal and tempered by years of hunting in the shadows. Tonight, everyone in that warehouse was going to learn why Shadow Protocol operatives had been considered the most dangerous people alive.
The warehouse erupted into chaos as Sarah's appearance triggered a cascade of violence that had been building since the moment the foreign intelligence teams had arrived at Pier 47. But unlike the ambush in Syria 3 years ago, this time Sarah was ready for the betrayal, and she had spent every day since then preparing for this exact moment.
Her first shot took down Bradley's lead security officer before the man could clear his weapon from its holster. Her second shot shattered the tablet computer containing the Shadow Protocol database, sending electronic fragments scattering across the concrete floor. In the space of 2 heartbeats, she had eliminated both the immediate threat to her life and the intelligence that multiple nations had paid millions to obtain. "All units, execute," Sarah shouted into her microphone as she rolled behind a shipping container, automatic weapons fire erupting from multiple directions as the various factions began engaging each other in the deadly crossfire she had anticipated. Phoenix 2 and 3 opened fire from their positions on the perimeter, their sniper rifles picking off foreign operatives who were trying to establish defensive positions. But the real advantage belonged to Sarah and her team. They knew the facility's layout perfectly, they had planned their fields of fire in advance, and most importantly, they were fighting for something more than money or national advantage. Bradley was scrambling for cover behind an overturned table, shouting orders to his remaining security personnel, while Khalil Assad tried to reach a communication device that would summon reinforcements. But Sarah had anticipated both moves, and her team had jammed all electronic communications within a 2-mile radius of the facility. "You're finished, Bradley," Sarah called out into her microphone as she moved through the maze of shipping containers, using her superior knowledge of urban warfare to outmaneuver opponents who were reacting to threats instead of controlling the battlefield. "There's nowhere to run, and no one is coming to save you." Colonel Volkov had taken cover behind his armored SUV and was coordinating his team's response with the tactical precision that had made Russian special forces legendary. But even his experience couldn't overcome the fundamental disadvantage of fighting on terrain that his enemies had chosen and prepared. Phoenix 3's sniper rifle sent a .550 caliber round through the SUV's engine block, eliminating both the vehicle's protective value and any possibility of escape. Dr. Li Hawei had produced a submachine gun from her briefcase and was laying down suppression fire while her team tried to reach an alternative exit from the warehouse. But Marcus had anticipated that move, and the Chinese operatives found their escape route blocked by explosive charges that had been placed hours earlier. The battle was turning into exactly the kind of close-quarters nightmare that Shadow Protocol operatives had been trained to dominate, while the foreign intelligence teams were hampered by their unfamiliarity with the terrain and their inability to coordinate with each other. Sarah moved through the facility like a ghost, appearing long enough to eliminate targets before vanishing back into the shadows. But it was Khalil Assad who represented her primary objective. The Syrian operative had been responsible for the deaths of her teammates, and she had spent 3 years planning the moment when she would finally face him in combat. When she found him crouched behind a concrete pillar, desperately trying to contact his backup team on a radio that would never work, she stepped into his line of sight with her weapon lowered. "Do you remember me?" she asked, her voice cutting through the sound of gunfire and explosions echoing throughout the warehouse. Assad's eyes widened as he recognized her face. "Impossible! You died in Syria. I saw your body after the ambush." Sarah smiled, and the expression contained no warmth or mercy. "You saw what you were meant to see. Admiral Bradley needed you to believe that all the Shadow Protocol operatives were dead, so he arranged for you to see evidence that would confirm your success. But I survived, Assad, and I've spent every day since then planning how I was going to kill you." The Syrian operative reached for his sidearm, but Sarah's weapon was already trained on his center mass. "The 11 operatives you murdered in Syria were good people. They had families, dreams, and a belief that they were serving something greater than themselves. You took all of that away for money." Assad's hand froze on his weapon as he realized that Sarah wasn't planning to simply execute him. She wanted him to understand exactly why he was about to die and who was responsible for bringing justice to the shadows where conventional law enforcement could never reach. "Please," Assad said, his voice cracking with fear as he realized that his years of success as a predator had finally led him into the territory of an apex predator. "I was following orders. Bradley paid us to eliminate American operatives. It was just business." Sarah's expression didn't change, but her finger tightened on the trigger. "The 11 operatives you murdered in Syria were good people.
They had families, dreams, and a belief that they were serving something greater than themselves. You took all of that away for money. The shot echoed through the warehouse with finality, and Khalil Assad crumpled to the ground, his years of hunting American operatives finally ended by one of the ghosts he thought he had created. But Sarah felt no satisfaction in the moment, only the cold resolution of a mission finally completed and justice finally served. Bradley was still alive, cowering behind inadequate cover while his carefully constructed network of corruption and betrayal collapsed around him. But he was no longer Sarah's primary concern. Admiral Morrison and the Navy's Internal Investigation Division would handle his prosecution, ensuring that his remaining years would be spent in a military prison cell contemplating the true cost of betraying the people who had trusted him with their lives. The foreign intelligence operatives were either dead or had surrendered, their expensive mission ending in complete failure and the exposure of their networks to American counterintelligence. The intelligence they had come to purchase was destroyed, their operatives were eliminated or captured, and their respective governments would spend years trying to rebuild the capabilities that had been shattered in a single night at Pier 47. As the smoke cleared and the last echoes of gunfire faded into the night, Sarah stood in the center of the warehouse where her journey had begun 3 years ago in a Syrian desert. The scar on her shoulder no longer throbbed with phantom pain. Instead, it felt like a badge of honor, proof that some betrayals could never be forgiven, but they could always be avenged.
6 months after the events at Pier 47, Lieutenant Sarah Chen walked through the corridors of the Pentagon wearing a uniform that bore new insignia, the silver oak leaves of a lieutenant commander, along with ribbons that told a story of extraordinary service in classified operations. The disciplinary hearing that had nearly ended her career was now nothing more than a carefully crafted cover story, designed to protect the true nature of the Shadow Protocol and the operatives who continued to serve in the deepest shadows of American intelligence. Admiral Morrison was waiting for her in a secure conference room, along with several other officers whose faces Sarah recognized from classified briefings, but whose true roles remained hidden behind layers of compartmentalized security. The Shadow Protocol had been officially disbanded after Bradley's betrayal, but like a phoenix rising from ashes, it had been reborn under a new name and with even greater capabilities. "Commander Chen," Admiral Morrison said as Sarah entered the room, "welcome to the Lazarus Initiative." The briefing that followed outlined the future of American covert operations, built on the lessons learned from Bradley's betrayal and designed to prevent such compromises from ever happening again. The new program would operate with unprecedented autonomy, its operatives scattered across multiple agencies and departments to prevent any single individual from having complete knowledge of its scope and capabilities. Sarah's new assignment would take her back into the field, but this time as the operational commander for a team of specialists recruited from the survivors of various compromised programs. They would be the hunters in the Shadow Wars, tasked with identifying and eliminating threats that conventional military and intelligence services couldn't touch. But the most satisfying part of the briefing was the news about Bradley's fate. The former vice admiral had been secretly court-martialed and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. His financial assets had been seized, his military pension revoked, and his name permanently struck from all official records of naval service. He would spend the rest of his life in solitary confinement, with no contact with the outside world and no possibility of ever again betraying the people who had trusted him. The foreign intelligence networks that had participated in the attempted purchase had been decimated by the consequences of their failure. The Russian operative Colonel Volkov had been recalled to Moscow, where he faced charges of incompetence that would likely result in a lengthy prison sentence in Siberia. The Chinese operative Dr. Li Wei had simply disappeared, presumably eliminated by her own government as a security risk. Assad's network had been captured by Syrian government forces and faced execution for their role in unauthorized intelligence operations. But perhaps the most important outcome was the restoration of the Shadow Protocol database. Sarah's team had recovered the fragments of Bradley's tablet computer and, working with NSA cryptographers, had managed to reconstruct the intelligence that had been stolen over the years. More importantly, they had been able to identify and notify every compromised asset, allowing them to be safely extracted or relocated before enemy forces could act on the leaked information. "There's one more thing," Admiral Morrison said as the briefing concluded.
The president has personally approved a special recognition for your actions at Pier 47. It will never appear in any public record, and you can never speak of it outside of the highest security classifications. But you should know that your country understands the sacrifice you have made. Sarah stood as Admiral Morrison pinned a new medal to her uniform, a simple silver star with no identifying markings, but which represented the highest honor that could be awarded for operations that officially never happened. It joined the other ribbons on her chest, each one telling a small part of a larger story of service in the shadows where heroes were never named and victories were never celebrated. As Sarah walked out into the Virginia sunshine that afternoon, she caught her sight of her reflection in the glass doors of the Pentagon. The woman looking back at her had been forged in the fires of betrayal and tempered by years of hunting in the shadows. She had been stripped of her uniform as punishment, only to emerge stronger and more dangerous than ever before. Behind her, in the depths of the Pentagon, Admiral Morrison was already planning the next mission for the Lazarus Initiative. There were new threats emerging in the Shadow Wars, new enemies who thought they could operate with impunity against American interests, and new operatives who needed to learn that some ghosts were too dangerous to disturb. The resurrection was complete. The hunt would continue. And in the spaces between light and darkness, where ordinary law enforcement could never reach, the guardians of American security would continue their eternal vigil, protecting a nation that would never know their names or understand the true scope of their sacrifice. The Shadow Protocol was dead. Long live the Lazarus Initiative.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.